You are listening to the Pregnancy Podcast with Vanessa Merton.
Hello. Thank you for tuning into the Pregnancy Podcast. In today's episode, we're talking about vitamin D. Vitamin D in pregnancy is one of these topics that sounds simple, but the details really matter. You use this essential vitamin in nearly every part of your body, and your baby depends entirely on you to supply it. The problem is that most pregnant moms do not get enough. Deficiency is incredibly common, and it's linked to a higher risk of complications like preeclampsia. To make things even more confusing, most prenatal vitamins contain far less vitamin D than the evidence actually suggests that you need during pregnancy. So in this episode, we will break down what vitamin D actually does, why deficiency is so widespread, how much you really need, and the simplest ways to ensure that you and your baby are getting enough. You can find the full article and all of the resources for this episode at pregnancypodcast.com/vitamin D. You are listening to the public feed of the podcast. That means ads and only a portion of the episodes. Premium gives you an ad-free feed and instant access to every episode of the podcast with evidence-based information that you won't find anywhere else. Check it out at pregnancypodcast.com/premium. VTech is the #1 baby monitor brand in North America and trusted by millions of families. The VTech RM6756 baby monitor has color night vision, a 5.5-inch HD screen, an ultra-wide 135-degree viewing, and free remote access with no subscription fees. This is available at Target. Check it out at pregnancypodcast.com/VTech. From skincare to treating common pregnancy symptoms like stretch marks with clinically proven ingredients, 8 Sheep Organics has you covered. Every product comes with a 100-day happiness guarantee. Try it risk-free. If you're not 100% happy with your purchase, simply send them an email and they'll get you a refund. No questions asked. Check out 8 Sheep Organics and save 10% when you go to pregnancypodcast.com/8sheep. AG1 is the daily health drink that combines your multivitamin, pre- and probiotics, superfoods, and antioxidants into one simple green scoop. It's one of the easiest things you can do to support your body every day. Head to drinkag1.com/pregnancypodcast, and when you first subscribe, you'll get an AG1 welcome kit, including a bottle of vitamin D3K2. We're going to talk about that in today's episode. Plus, you get to try each new flavor of AG1. Check it out at drinkag1.com/pregnancypodcast. Vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. That means that it dissolves in fat and is stored in fatty tissue. So as a result, your body can hold onto it and use it as needed. This is different from a water-soluble vitamin, which your body just flushes out when you have extra. One of the most important jobs that vitamin D does is that it helps you absorb other essential nutrients, things like calcium, iron, magnesium, phosphate, and zinc. Plus, vitamin D regulates immune function. It supports cell growth and neuromuscular function and affects thousands of genes. You actually have receptors for vitamin D throughout your whole body, in your placenta, your breasts, colon, lung, bone, pancreas, immune system, and the lining of your blood vessels. This is not a simple nutrient, and it does so many things. There's 2 main types of vitamin D. You have D3, cholecalciferol, that's generated in your skin and in the skin of animals. Then you have D2, that's ergocalciferol, that comes from plants. Both forms start out biologically inert, which means that they're not yet active. We get this inactive vitamin D from sun exposure, from food, or from supplements. For it to actually be useful, vitamin D has to go through 2 conversion steps in your body. The first happens in your liver that converts vitamin D to calcidiol. Then the second happens mostly in the kidneys, and those form calcitriol. Calcitriol is the active form. This is one of the reasons why vitamin D is sometimes called a hormone, because the activated forms function as hormones in the body. Now that you have a basic understanding of how your body makes vitamin D, why is it so deficient if this is something that we can do ourselves? Modern lifestyles have dramatically changed how much vitamin D we can get naturally. Our ancestors were spending way more time outside than we do today. Those who lived in colder climates that were far from the equator, so they got less sunlight, were eating diets rich in fish. And today, our lives look very different. We're spending a lot of time indoors. Many of us live where sunlight is limited for most or part of the year. We're wearing sunscreen that blocks the rays that we need. And our diets are not rich in vitamin D. As a result of all of these things, deficiency is more common than ever. An estimated 1 billion people worldwide are deficient in vitamin D, and that's across all ethnicities and age groups. The most serious risks of deficiency are rickets in children and osteoporosis in adults. Rickets causes softening and distortion of the bones, and osteoporosis makes bones brittle and prone to fractures. Because of this, many developed countries started fortifying foods with vitamin D back in the 1930s. Specifically, they wanted to reduce rickets. Since then, researchers have also linked low vitamin D to a wide range of conditions, from cancer to COVID-19. Given how many processes in the body rely on vitamin D, it makes sense that a deficiency could affect a very wide range of health outcomes. Some groups are at a higher risk of deficiency than others. Older adults are more vulnerable because skin converts vitamin D less efficiently with age. People with limited sun exposure, whether because of where they live or how they spend their days, are at a greater risk. And the same is true for anyone who's covering most of their skin with clothing or who is diligent about sunscreen. Under ideal lab conditions, applied at the thickness that's used in testing, sunscreen with an SPF of 15 can block most vitamin D production in the skin. In the real-world use, though, the effect tends to be smaller because most people are applying far less sunscreen than that, plus they're going to miss spots. But sunscreen can block vitamin D. Your skin tone also matters. People that have more melanin in their skin produce less vitamin D. So that means that people with darker skin tones are at a higher risk of deficiency. People that are obese also tend to have lower available vitamin D. That's because fat cells hold onto it and make it less available to the rest of the body. And there's some conditions that can affect fat absorption, along with some genetic differences in how we convert vitamin D, and those can all raise your risk as well. The only way to know for sure whether you are deficient in vitamin D is a blood test. And that's a test that measures serum level of 25-hydroxyvitamin D. This marker rises and falls in proportion to how much vitamin D you make and how much you're taking in. Unfortunately, this is not a routine test that most doctors are giving their patients. And this is so important during pregnancy because many expecting mothers are deficient. One study of vitamin D during pregnancy found that 97% of African American women, 81% of Hispanic women, and 67% of Caucasian women were deficient. So we're talking the majority. This is way more than 50%. So why is vitamin D so important during pregnancy? Mainly, your baby's relying entirely on your vitamin D levels for their supply of it. The main job of vitamin D is helping your body absorb calcium from your food. Without enough vitamin D, you're only absorbing a fraction of the calcium that you take in. So calcitriol, which is the active form, is naturally elevated during pregnancy. And that is so that you can deliver enough calcium to your growing baby. An estimated 25 to 30 grams of calcium transfers to your baby's skeleton by the time that they're born. Most of that happens in the last trimester. So this is one reason why vitamin D becomes especially important during pregnancy, because your baby needs it to develop bones. Of course, your baby needs vitamin D for a lot of things. And deficiency in pregnancy is a risk factor for preeclampsia. It's also associated with increased odds of a primary cesarean section. And these effects of deficiencies can reach well beyond birth. One study looked at how maternal vitamin D deficiency could affect a child later in life. Researchers found associations with impaired lung development at age 6, neurocognitive difficulties at age 10, a higher risk of eating disorders in adolescence, and a lower peak bone mass at age 20. The bottom line here is that the evidence strongly supports ensuring that you get enough vitamin D during pregnancy. So how much vitamin D do you need? To understand this, it helps to know that there's two different numbers in play here. The first is your measured 25-hydroxy vitamin D blood level. That tells you where you actually stand. The second is the amount of vitamin D that you take in each day. So these two things are related, but they're not the same. Obviously, the more vitamin D that you're taking in, either through your skin or your diet, the higher your hydroxy vitamin D levels will be. Let's start with blood levels. The National Academy of Medicine set reference points for serum 25-hydroxy vitamin D concentrations. A level below 30 nanomoles per liter, or 12 nanograms per milliliter, is considered deficient. Between 30 and 50 nanomoles per liter, which is 12 to 20 nanograms per milliliter, is inadequate for bone and overall health. Then above 50 nanomoles per liter, or 20 nanograms per milliliter, is considered adequate for most healthy people. You can also have too much vitamin D. Levels above 125 nanomoles per liter, or 50 nanograms per milliliter, can actually be associated with potential harm. You don't need to memorize all of these numbers. They would be explained if you take a test, but the only way to know what your actual serum levels are is to get tested. Now let's talk about daily intake. Recommended amounts are set in the dietary reference intakes. These tend to vary for different things based on age, sex, whether you're pregnant or breastfeeding, and there's two key values. There's the recommended dietary allowance, or the RDA. This is the daily intake that meets the needs of nearly all healthy people. Then you have the tolerable upper intake level, or the UL. That's the most that you can take daily without likely harm. So for vitamin D, the recommendations are actually the same from age 1 to 70. Whether you're female, pregnant, or breastfeeding doesn't matter. The RDA is 15 micrograms, or 600 international units, and the upper intake limit is 100 micrograms, or 4,000 international units. I know this is confusing. Vitamin D is listed two different ways on labels: in micrograms, as mcg, or as international units, abbreviated IU. If you wanted to convert them, 1 microgram equals 40 international units. So if you're looking at a vitamin D supplement or it's listed in your prenatal vitamin as micrograms, you can just multiply that figure by 40 to get the international units, because that's what most pregnancy research uses. That's how we're referring to it in this episode. This isn't exactly cut and dry, and it gets interesting because some professional societies take a much stronger position. In 2024, the Endocrine Society published a new guideline that updated and replaced its older recommendations. For pregnancy, they recommend vitamin D supplementation for everyone rather than waiting for a blood test to show deficiency. And they point to the potential to lower the risk of preeclampsia, preterm birth, a baby who is small for gestational age, and pregnancy loss. Getting an adequate amount is one thing, but you really want not just an adequate level, but you want an optimal one. So this new guideline gives a little bit more direction on dosing. Across the trials they reviewed, the vitamin D doses ranged from 600 to 5,000 international units per day. It's a pretty wide range. So the weighted average was roughly 2,500 international units per day. The takeaway here is that the current thinking really leans towards just supplementing rather than testing first. And they suggest that routine vitamin D testing in healthy pregnant women is not recommended. And that's because there's not yet a clear blood level target that reliably predicts better pregnancy outcomes. So the position of the Endocrine Society is don't even bother testing for it. And if you're pregnant, you should be supplementing. So what's the number, though, that you should actually be taking? The RDA sets a floor of 600 international units. The evidence, including the latest Endocrine Society guidance, supports going well above that during pregnancy, often in the range of 1,000 to 4,000 international units per day. But that 4,000 figure, that's the National Academy of Medicine's official upper limit, meaning that's the most that they consider safe for nearly everyone without medical supervision. This is a deliberately conservative number, and other groups set the ceiling much higher. The Endocrine Society, for example, has used 10,000 international units per day as its upper limit. So 4,000 international units is a safe target to aim for, but not a hard line where risk suddenly starts. And you'll get more context for this when we really look at the research specific to pregnancy. The whole reason that there's an issue with taking too much vitamin D is that it's fat soluble. Most vitamins are water soluble, so that means if you take too much of them, your body just passes the excess in your urine. There's only 4 vitamins that are fat soluble: A, D, E, and K. Since your body stores these in fat rather than just flushing them out if you have excess, they carry a higher risk of building up toxic levels. The first thing you should know is that you can't get too much vitamin D from the sun. Of course, you can get a sunburn. You should be protecting your skin. You can, however, take too much vitamin D in a supplement form. Toxicity is not something that happens often with this. It's usually the result of an accidental overdose or an error in manufacturing. In the 1990s, there was actually a case where a dairy made a processing error that left a batch of milk with about 58,000 international units in just 8 ounces. And that mistake only came to light after 8 people were hospitalized. So this is a rare case. This doesn't typically happen from someone over-supplementing with vitamin D. When toxicity does happen, it leads to hypercalcemia. This is a buildup of calcium in the blood that disrupts bone metabolism. Good news is if this were to happen, it's usually treatable without lasting harm. It also helps to understand how toxicity actually develops. Again, this is not about a single big dose on one day. Vitamin D toxicity generally comes from taking very high amounts day after day over weeks, months, or years. Acute toxicity is typically associated with sustained intakes above 10,000 international units per day. That's far beyond the RDA of 600 international units and any amounts that are used in pregnancy that we're talking about in today's episode. So, hypothetically, if you accidentally doubled up your dose of vitamin D for one day, that's not the concern. The concern is consistently taking far more than you need over a long stretch of time. So let's talk about what the pregnancy research actually says about dosing. A double-blind randomized clinical trial assigned pregnant women to receive 400, 2,000, or 4,000 international units of D3 per day. This started between 12 to 16 weeks and then continued into birth. The researchers found that 4,000 international units per day was both safe and the most effective at achieving sufficiency in the mothers and their newborns. And that was regardless of race. The lower doses, like the 400 international units that is found in a typical prenatal vitamin, were far less effective at reaching adequate levels, especially in African American women. A separate randomized controlled trial reached a similar conclusion and also supported 4,000 international units per day during pregnancy. A Cochrane review synthesized a lot of this data. They compared women who took vitamin D during pregnancy with those who received a placebo or no supplement. This review was updated last in 2024. It looked at 8 different studies involving over 2,300 women. The takeaway is a little bit more cautious. The evidence on whether vitamin D lowers the risk of preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, or preterm birth was very uncertain. That was largely because the available studies were small and of mixed quality. There was some low certainty evidence that supplementing may reduce the risk of severe postpartum hemorrhage, but that data just came from one single study. The reviewers really concluded that we need larger, higher quality trials to say anything definitive, especially when it comes to safety. And that's frustrating. We hear that all the time, that we just need more research. So you can see that there's some conflicting opinions here. The Endocrine Society leans towards supplementing during pregnancy. This Cochrane review is a little bit more reserved about the proof on specific benefits. Both of these can be true. The Endocrine Society is weighing the low cost and low risk of supplementing against the potential upside, even where trial evidence is not yet definitive. Then we have the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. They do not recommend routine vitamin D supplementation beyond what is in a prenatal vitamin, and they do not support routine testing of vitamin D levels. That said, ACOG does note that when deficiency is identified during pregnancy, most experts agree that 1,000 to 2,000 international units per day is safe. ACOG, as they tend to be, is a little bit more conservative, especially compared to the Endocrine Society, but both agree that supplementing within these ranges is reasonable and safe. I know we've talked about a lot of studies and a lot of numbers. Here's kind of a summary of what we've talked about so far. Deficiency is common. Clearly, it's worth avoiding that if you can. Supplementing during pregnancy appears to be safe at the doses studied. We're really looking at up to 4,000 international units. Given the low cost and low risk, the Endocrine Society still leans towards supplementing reasonable amounts. We're talking somewhere between 1,000 and 4,000 international units per day. The bigger debate is really less about whether to supplement and more about how much. Next, we're going to talk about how you actually get vitamin D. We'll talk about getting it from sunlight, how you can increase it in your diet, and give you more info on choosing a supplement. Before we do that, I would like to thank the companies that have supported this episode. A lot of companies have exclusive discounts for pregnancy podcast listeners, and you can always find discounts and promo codes at pregnancypodcast.com/resources. If you want to see your baby from another room, from the backyard, or from somewhere away from home, a monitor with smartphone access is really useful. The tricky part is finding one that doesn't lock that feature behind a monthly subscription. The VTech RM6756 baby monitor solves that problem. You get free live remote access through your smartphone or tablet with no subscription fees ever. At home, you can watch on a device or you can watch on the 5.5-inch high-def color LCD screen with 1080 pixel video quality and ultra-wide 135-degree viewing so you can see more of your baby's room at a glance. There's color night vision, so you have a much clearer picture in low light than traditional black and white night vision. And the touch adaptive multicolor nightlight automatically adjusts brightness to match your nursery. You also get a two-way talk back intercom, lullabies and ambient sounds, and a temperature sensor. VTech is the #1 baby monitor brand in North America and is trusted by millions of families. The VTech RM6756 is available at Target. Check it out at pregnancypodcast.com/VTech. AG1 is the daily health drink that combines your multivitamin, pre- and probiotics, superfoods, and antioxidants into one simple green scoop. This is one of the easiest things you can do to support your body every day. AG1 goes to great lengths to continuously invest in rigorous peer-reviewed clinical trials. And you know that I love research. I want evidence as to why I should be taking something. AG1 goes above and beyond in testing for hundreds of contaminants and impurities to really guarantee that they deliver the highest quality nutrients available. I've been starting every morning with AG1 for years. I love the peace of mind knowing that I'm covering all the key nutrients that my body needs, plus supporting my microbiome, metabolism, and immune system. Today's episode, we're talking about vitamin D. You actually get a bottle of vitamin D3K2 when you first subscribe to AG1. This is the vitamin D supplement that I take every single day and that I've been taking for years. Head to drinkag1.com/pregnancypodcast. When you first subscribe to AG1, you'll get an AG1 welcome kit, a bottle of vitamin D3K2, and you'll get to try each new flavor of AG1. Go to drinkag1.com/pregnancypodcast. As a friendly reminder, pregnant or nursing women should seek professional medical advice before taking this or any other dietary supplement. Let's get back to today's episode. There's really only two ways that your body gets vitamin D, either from the sun or from your diet, which could also include supplements. So let's walk through each of these so you can get a realistic sense of how much you're actually getting. It's estimated that about 90% of our vitamin D comes from the sun. And because it's fat soluble, your body can store it. This means that you can build up reserves during the summer months when you're spending more time outside, and then draw on those reserves later. So the sun gives off both UVA and UVB rays. UVA rays are the ones that contribute to skin damage and premature aging. UVB rays are the ones that your body needs to make vitamin D. When UVB rays hit your skin, they kick off a conversion process. So your skin initiates the reaction, and then your liver and kidneys play a role, effectively converting sunlight into the active hormone that your body can use. How much vitamin D you actually make depends on a lot of different factors, including things like where you live, the season, the time of day, how much of your skin is exposed, your skin tone. If you live closer to the equator, you're getting much more usable sunlight year-round. If you're living above 37 degrees latitude, you're probably not making enough vitamin D from the sun during the winter. To picture where 37 degrees latitude is, imagine if you cut California in half around San Francisco and then traced across the northern borders of Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, over to Philadelphia on the East Coast. There's a couple of other things worth knowing. UVB rays do not pass through glass, but UVA rays do. That means if you're sitting by a sunny window, you can still get sun damage without actually getting the benefits of producing any vitamin D. Sunscreen also works the same way for vitamin D production. SPF blocks UVB rays. Remember, those are the ones you need to make vitamin D. Broad spectrum sunscreen, which is the recommendation for most sunscreens, blocks both UVA and UVB. So any sunscreen with SPF will limit how much vitamin D you can make. So you may be thinking that you should be skipping sunscreen. Pregnancy does add another consideration to this. Your skin tends to be more sensitive when you're pregnant, including to the sun. Plus, if you have melasma, that's darker patches of skin on your face, or you have other pigmentation changes like a darkening line down the center of your belly, sun exposure can make that more noticeable. The same goes for stretch marks. Stretch marks at the start contain little to no melanin, so they don't tan the same way that the surrounding skin does. So sun exposure can darken the skin around them and potentially make them more noticeable, which could also slow how they fade over time. So if you're spending time in the sun, it's worth keeping these areas covered or protected. So if you're trying to figure out how much vitamin D can you actually make from spending time in the sun, it's really hard to try and nail that down. And that's because there's so many variables. There's plenty of online calculators. These really vary all over the place. I couldn't find a good one that I felt like was accurate enough to share, but there are some general rules that will be helpful here. The strongest UV light is between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. You could spend an hour outside at 9 a.m. and get about the same UV exposure that you would in 15 minutes at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. As a rule of thumb, if you're out in the sun long enough for your skin to turn pink, then you did it too long, right? You're not trying to get sunburned. You don't have to be in the sun for hours. You don't have to be naked or exposing most of your skin. Getting some sun on your arms, legs, face, or back is enough. For many people, though, it's just not realistic to rely on the sun year-round, unless you live somewhere where you're spending a lot of time outdoors and that's sunny most of the year. So this is where diet and supplements really come in. Getting enough vitamin D from food alone is difficult. Fish is one of the richest food sources of vitamin D. A 3-ounce serving of wild-caught salmon has about 570 international units. Be careful, though, because farm-raised salmon has roughly a quarter of that. So if you're buying salmon specifically for the vitamin D, you want to steer clear of farmed salmon and steer clear of Atlantic salmon. That is actually just a marketing term that notes that it is farm-raised. So you want to look specifically for fish labeled wild-caught. Fish oil is also high in vitamin D. Some fish oil supplements include it. Beyond that, many foods are fortified. So an 8-ounce glass of milk or fortified orange juice has around 120 international units. Unless you're eating fish every day or drinking a lot of milk, it's unlikely that you're getting enough vitamin D from your diet alone. Most other foods contain only small amounts. As an example, a single egg yolk has about 44 international units. So if you're trying to hit that 600 international unit RDA, you'd have to eat more than a dozen eggs every day. If you have a plant-based diet, it makes it even harder to get vitamin D from food. The main whole food plant source is mushrooms, but only those that are treated with UV light or that are grown in the wild actually contain decent levels of vitamin D. Most mushrooms that you're buying at the grocery store, like white button mushrooms, are grown in dark rooms and they contain very little vitamin D. If you want to increase your consumption of mushrooms, specifically to increase vitamin D, you want to look for ones specifically exposed to sunlight or UV lamps. But there's other things here. Vitamin D levels start dropping after about a week in the fridge, and cooking reduces them even further. Beyond mushrooms, plant-based options are mostly fortified foods, like fortified plant milks, orange juice, and cereals, and then along with supplements. If you have a plant-based diet, and you want a vegan D3, you're going to look for a D3 made from lechin. Most D3 is animal derived, and D2 from plants is generally considered less effective at raising your levels. But good news, if you do have a plant-based diet, you can find a supplement for D3 that is also plant-based. Of course, you should be getting vitamin D in your prenatal vitamin. Most prenatals contain 400 international units. Although with everything we've talked about in today's episode, we know that's likely not enough during pregnancy. Some higher quality options, like the Zoller Prenatal Plus DHA, which is my favorite, include more. They're reflecting more the evidence, showing that 400 international units is really falling short. But if you want to know exactly how much is in your prenatal vitamin, you can find that information on the label. Now let's talk supplementing. For most people, the simplest approach is what the Endocrine Society points to, which is skip the routine testing and just supplement. That's the easiest thing that you can do. That removes a lot of the guesswork. You can always talk to your doctor or midwife about having your levels tested if you want a clearer picture, and especially if you're in a higher risk group. I would also take into account how much vitamin D is already in your prenatal vitamin and any other supplements you're taking. So if you're taking fish oil on top of your prenatal vitamin, I would also look there and find out how much vitamin D that contains. And then your diet. If you're eating wild-caught salmon regularly, then your vitamin D levels should be higher. You don't have to make this an in-depth process and get a spreadsheet and calculators out. You just want a rough estimate as to how much vitamin D you're getting every day. As with any supplement, you should run this by your doctor or midwife. Vitamin D supplements come in some different forms. They're all relatively inexpensive, but like any vitamin or supplement, quality really matters. One study tested 55 bottles of vitamin D from 12 manufacturers. They found that the actual content ranged widely, from 9% to 146% of what the label claimed. The amount even varied from pill to pill within the same bottle. So it's important that you're getting a high quality vitamin D if you're taking this as a supplement. You may also notice that many D3 supplements include K2. The role of vitamin K here is to help direct the calcium that vitamin D is helping you absorb to actually get to your bones, rather than letting it accumulate in your arteries. Personally, I take a supplement that combines D3, K2. I take the one that AG1 makes. AG1 does consistent testing, makes really high quality products. So I trust that what's on the label is actually what's in the bottle. If you want to try a D3K2 supplement, when you first subscribe to AG1, you'll get a bottle of their D3K2. This is a liquid, so you just use the dropper, add it to a drink. You can just take it straight. It makes it really easy to adjust your dose. We know that your baby depends on you for vitamin D in the womb, but that dependence continues after they're born when they're breastfeeding. Remember, vitamin D can be stored. So most infants use up the vitamin D that they got from you before birth by around 8 weeks of age. So for the first 6 months, your baby's diet is entirely either breast milk or formula. And breast milk is naturally low in vitamin D. Infant formula is actually fortified with it. Plus, your baby's probably not making a lot of vitamin D from the sun because most pediatricians will recommend keeping babies out of direct sunlight for the first 6 months until it's recommended that you can use sunscreen. So it's hard for them to get vitamin D from the sun. A few things here. First, it's worth understanding why breast milk is low in vitamin D. It's not that it's a flaw. The amount of vitamin D in your milk closely tracks the level in your own blood. So most moms today are already running low on vitamin D. We have limited sun exposure, low dietary intake, so that means that their milk runs low too. A mother with healthy vitamin D levels actually produces milk with more vitamin D in it. So it's still important that you are getting plenty of vitamin D after you have your baby. The American Academy of Pediatrics doubled its recommended intake for children to at least 400 international units per day. This was a recommendation that took place back in 2009. They advised that infants who are exclusively or partially breastfeeding receive 400 international units of supplemental vitamin D daily, starting in the first few days of life. This is typically given as vitamin D drops. A small daily dose is just placed in your baby's mouth, or you can put it on your nipple before nursing or on the nipple of a bottle before you give them a bottle. Despite this recommendation and that it's been in place since 2009, most infants are not getting vitamin D. The American Academy of Pediatrics published a study finding that only about 27% of infants met the vitamin D intake guidelines. The American Academy of Pediatrics says that you should supplement your baby with it. Another approach would be to increase your own intake. That's going to be less reliable because you don't know exactly how much vitamin D you're passing to your baby. But there is some science to back this up. A randomized controlled trial of 334 breastfeeding mother-infant pairs tested this theory. They compared mothers taking 6,400 international units per day with no drops for the baby against the standard approach of just giving a baby 400 international units per day. The babies whose mothers took the 6,400 international units reached the same vitamin D levels as the babies who received their own drops. This research concluded that maternal supplementation at 6,400 international units per day safely supplies breast milk with enough vitamin D to meet a nursing infant's needs, offering a real alternative to infant drops. An earlier, smaller study reported similar findings and concluded that a maternal intake of 4,000 international units per day could substantially improve maternal and infant vitamin D status. Takeaway here is, if you are breastfeeding and you increase your vitamin D with a supplement, that increase will transfer through breast milk. If you have questions about whether your baby's getting enough vitamin D, if you should be supplementing yourself or your baby, this is a great conversation to have with your pediatrician. So let's tie all of this together with some practical takeaways. Big picture here, vitamin D is essential for your health and for your babies. Plus, vitamin D deficiency is common. And most people, including many pregnant moms, are not getting enough vitamin D. The best way to know your levels would be to take a blood test. But routine testing is not always recommended. It may not be covered by insurance. If you do take a test, you can know exactly how much you should supplement with. And you may be a stronger candidate for a test if you have darker skin, you get very little sun, you cover most of your skin when you're outside for religious or personal reasons or just comfort level. If you know your starting number, that can help you and your provider decide how much to supplement rather than guessing. Then, of course, you also want to estimate how much vitamin D you're realistically getting. So look at your sun exposure, factor in how much time you're spending outdoors, where you live, the season, sunscreen use, skin exposure, your skin tone, and then think about how much vitamin D is in your prenatal vitamin. It's likely around 400 international units. It may be higher in higher quality brands. And then consider how often your diet includes vitamin D-rich foods, which is primarily fish and milk. If you want the simplest approach possible, you have the option to skip the test and just take a supplement. This is where the current guidance is leaning. I know guidance can feel confusing because not every organization agrees and comes to the same conclusion. But evidence consistently supports intakes above that 600 international unit RDA during pregnancy. A lot of studies that we talked about today, along with the Endocrine Society, support daily amounts in the range of 1,000 to 4,000 international units. And if you're breastfeeding, the evidence supports going even higher. Vitamin D is inexpensive. It takes almost no effort to add it to your routine. You're already taking a prenatal vitamin every day. Remember, toxicity comes from taking very high amounts over an extended period, not from an occasional higher dose. None of the research that I reviewed for this episode found adverse effects from supplementing below the toxicity threshold. The downside here is really minimal as long as you're not overdoing it. And the upside is ensuring that you and your baby get enough vitamin D to support everything from healthy bones to immune function. As always, talk to your doctor, your midwife, your pediatrician before starting any supplement. If you are concerned about your vitamin D levels, please advocate for yourself to be tested, especially if you fall into a higher risk group. If you have any questions about vitamin D, your care provider is the right person to help you sort through that for your specific situation. To recap everything that we talked about in today's episode, we talked about what vitamin D is, the two main types, and how your body activates it. We talked about deficiency, why it's so common, who's at the highest risk for that, and how widespread it is among pregnant moms. We talked about why vitamin D is so important during pregnancy, especially for your baby's developing bones. And we dug through a lot of research to try and nail down how much vitamin D you should actually be taking. Then we talked about where vitamin D comes from sunlight to diet to your prenatal vitamin, and what to look for in a supplement, including potentially taking a D3K2. I'd like to thank you for tuning into the Pregnancy Podcast today. I hope that you find this episode helpful. Please share this episode if you know someone who's pregnant. So many listeners discover the podcast through recommendations, and I appreciate you sharing it. As always, you can reach me, Vanessa, at pregnancypodcast.com. You can read the full article and see all of the resources that accompany this episode at pregnancypodcast.com/vitamin D. If today's deep dive into vitamin D was useful, there are hundreds more episodes like it waiting for you in Pregnancy Podcast Premium. You get an ad-free podcast feed, every single episode, and a free copy of the Your Birth Plan book. Check it out at pregnancypodcast.com/premium.